You are viewing one of 10 modules developed through a project funded by Geoscience BC focused on direct-use geothermal resources in British Columbia. This follow-up project was carried out between August and December 2016. The project was executed by Tuyaterra Geocorp. These modules were developed from the Direct-Use Geothermal Resources Roadmap published by Geoscience BC in June 2016. They incorporate additional educational material that were developed as part of the current follow-up project. The voices you will hear narrating the module are myself, Catherine Hickson, and my colleague, Juliana Proenza.
Welcome back, everyone. We are currently on Module 8, which will be going through some of the funding options that are available for First Nations and communities. The outline of what we'll be going through is giving you the link to the BC Government Document Guide that goes through some of the funding options that we'll be taking you through during this module. And then we'll be going through some examples for some of the national funding opportunities that are not covered by the BC Government Document Guide, and then some of the examples that are provincial-wide, and then some of the funding and grant opportunities available in different regions of the province. Then we'll be going through some of the tax incentives that are available for geothermal, which we have gone through in Module 7 in the economic considerations. And then we'll just go through a couple of the chapters that were covered by the 2016 federal budget that are relevant for potential future opportunities for funding with respects to geothermal and alternative energy and clean energy technologies in general. So the BC Government Document Guide, we've included the link here. What it does is it provides a support program guide for First Nation and civic communities with respects to energy efficiency and clean energy projects. So you can see I've just included the first page of the table of contents here, and in this case it covers some of the granting opportunities available for both First Nations and civic communities, and then there are also lists that are available for only First Nation communities and only civic communities. Before we go through some of the examples for what's available provincially in BC, there are three major funding sources available nationally. One of these is the Sustainable Development Technology Canada Granting Program, and the other is the National Research Council Industrial Research Assistance Program. And there is also a third option I've included here, which isn't a granting program, but it allows First Nations to access debt financing. So to go through some of the details for the First Nations Finance Authority, it's a voluntary not-for-profit organization that provides low-rate loans, investment options, and capital planning advice to First Nations government. It's governed by the First Nation communities that join as borrowing members, and these borrowing members can access loans that have several characteristics such as repayment terms up to 30 years, they do not require collateral, can be used for refinancing existing debt, and have interest rates that parallel to loans available to provincial and local governments. So some of the examples that are available in the program support guide that I mentioned earlier, we'll just be going through some of the details associated with some of these granting opportunities. So one is the BC Strategic Priorities Fund, and this is a fund that is administered under the Renewed Gas Tax Agreement, and eligible project categories have been expanded to the following. And the ones that are relevant for geothermal would include community energy systems and recreational, cultural, and tourism infrastructure, if there is a recreational component to some of the systems and geothermal resources in the area. The application-based program is available to local governments and other recipients outside of the Greater Vancouver Regional District. As little as $20,000 up to $6 million have been awarded for projects across BC. And this money can be used for capacity building and for capital infrastructure. Another funding program is called the BC First Nations Clean Energy Business Fund, and it promotes increased Aboriginal community participation in the clean energy sector within the First Nations asserted traditional territories and treaty areas. There are three different types of funds given out, and they relate to capacity funding, equity grants, and revenue sharing. And the amounts differ depending on the granting stream that you're going through. So this fund was launched in October 2014, and the initial appropriation was $5 million, and in 2014, an additional $1 million was allocated. The fund is expected to receive additional revenue from new projects as they come online, based on a percentage of land and water rentals associated with those projects. Another grant program is called the BC Infrastructure Planning Grant Program, and the next deadline is in January of 2017. It offers grants to support local governments in projects related to development of sustainable community infrastructure. So these grants can be used for a range of activities related to assessing the technical, environmental, and/or economic feasibility of municipal infrastructure projects. In addition, grants up to $10,000 are available to help improve or develop long-term comprehensive plans that include, but are not limited to, capital asset management plans and community energy plans. So these aspects are very important for geothermal, particularly for providing heat for community infrastructure and understanding and evaluating what the heating needs of a community are. Another fund that is relevant for possibly accessing for geothermal resource development is called the BC Rural Dividend Fund. Applications were open during the month of October, and the next intake is May of 2017. There is a total of a 3-year funding window available for a sum of $75 million, and as of October, almost $500,000 had been awarded to 30 communities, 15 First Nations, and 2 not-for-profits. Another granting fund is called the BC New Building Canada Fund, a small communities fund. This was launched in October 2014, and the first round of applications resulted in $128 million allocated to 55 communities in BC. The provincial and federal governments will each allocate approximately $109 million to support infrastructure projects in communities with populations less than 100,000 people. The funding window for this program runs between 2014 to 2024, and it operates concurrently with the gas tax funding program. Another granting program that is available for First Nation communities is the BC Indigenous Clean Energy Initiative. It provides early support to develop Indigenous communities' capacity and readiness to advance local or regional clean energy projects in BC. So, for example, if a community doesn't have a community energy plan in place, this is something that this granting program could potentially provide the funding for that. Eligible recipients include governments of self-governing First Nations, tribal councils, or groups of 2 or more First Nations and Indigenous for-profit or not-for-profit corporations, partnerships, associations, cooperatives, and institutions, which are majority owned and controlled by Indigenous people. The eligible initiatives include activities such as identifying, planning, and implementing viable clean energy projects. And typically the support for this program is about $75,000 to $150,000, but applicants may be eligible for additional funding under subsequent intakes. The BCICEI funded costs must be incurred prior to April 30th, 2019. And the recipients are required to leverage 10% of eligible project costs, so that's something to keep in mind. The BC First Nations Equity Fund is a joint partnership between the New Relationship Trust, the All Nations Trust Company, and the Nuu-chah-nulth Economic Development Corporation. And what this equity fund does is it offers competitively priced equity loans to BC First Nations so that they may have the opportunity to participate as owners and or partners in commercially viable green energy projects. I've included the BC Community Futures program in here because it is an important resource for entrepreneurs and small businesses. So if you've got an innovative idea for how geothermal resource development can play a role in your community, I think this could be a really important resource for that. And so this program offers loans of up to $150,000, and it invests in activities and projects designed to allow communities to be resilient and successful. And other things that they assist with are business development and promoting community economic development and economic adjustment initiatives. I won't go into too much detail with respect to some other regional programs because they're only relevant for different parts of the province. But I just wanted to show that there are different opportunities in different parts of the province that communities can access for regional funding programs. So the Northern Development Funding Program actually covers quite a bit of the northern and central parts of the province. And what's really important here is that they allow funding for different initiatives. So it could be capital investment analysis, marketing initiatives, economic diversification infrastructure, and community halls and recreational facilities, which all fall under community development. Then they also have a stream for business development and another stream for capacity building. So there's really several avenues that a community could access grants and funding to evaluate and develop direct use projects in this case. The Southern Interior Development Initiative Trust covers the South Interior portion of the province. It was formed in 2007, and the main thing here is that for-profit entities are not eligible, and they only fund up to $25,000 or a maximum of 25% of total project budget. So they're not huge funds, but if you are in the evaluation or early exploration stage, this is definitely something that could be an option. So we've already discussed some of the tax savings opportunities for industry with respects to the development of different types of geothermal systems, ground source heating systems, district energy systems, and geothermal electrical generation. And really what this allows is for eligible equipment that's involved in the deployment of a system to be written off at either 30% per year or 50% depending on which class it falls under. And so this is something that would go within the business model, economic modeling aspect once you are at the stage of evaluating all the different equipment components that you would need. And you can take this into consideration, and it just improves your economics. And chapters 3 and 4 of the 2016 federal budget did have some details included for future funding, specifically for First Nations communities and clean growth economy in general. So we've got about $500 million that are going to be invested in First Nation green infrastructure funding, and about $250 million over 2 years starting this year for First Nation infrastructure funds, and this includes energy systems. And then for the clean growth economy in general, we've got about $10 million over 2 years that will be provided for implementing renewable energy projects in off-grid Indigenous northern communities that rely on diesel and other fossil fuels to generate heat and power. So there's a possibility of funding up to 2021 that would be managed federally for green infrastructure, and in particular First Nations communities. So that's something to look forward to and seeing how those granting programs will be developed. That summarizes just some of the different granting opportunities available for communities in BC. I encourage you to look at the support program, which I'll pull up here. This is the support program guide that's available for First Nations and civic communities. So definitely encourage you to look through this document and evaluate which granting programs could be accessed by your community with respect to green infrastructure and direct use projects, in specifically if that's of interest to your community.